Briar Creek. Ohio, October 12, 1983, when a forgotten photograph surfaced in the dusty evidence room wedged behind an old RCA Radio A. Cold case, long buried in small-town memory, suddenly breathed again. The picture showed something no one ever reported, and someone who never should have been there. Some mistakes never stay hidden forever. The Briar Creek Police Department always smelled like old paper and stronger coffee than any human stomach should tolerate. By 2024, most of its original furniture remained untouched, the same oak desks from the 70s. The same scuffed linoleum floors from 1982. The same humming fluorescent lights that flickered every time the winter winds rattled the windows. It was the kind of place where time didn't move forward so much as it circled around itself. On a Thursday morning in early March, a young evidence clerk named Jamie Merrick, barely 23 and too optimistic for a building like this, was reorganizing the cold case room. He had one earbud in, playing a playlist full of 80s hits. Africa by Toto was echoing faintly as he shifted boxes around. Music his mother used to clean the house too. It made him feel oddly connected to a decade he never lived in. That was when he found the photograph. It wasn't filed, wasn't labeled, wasn't even inside a folder. It had slipped down behind a dusty RCA tabletop radio, the same one the department used during night shifts before everything went digital. The radio hadn't worked in decades, but no one had the heart to throw it out. It sat like a relic of simpler times back when Briar Creek had one movie theater, 2 stoplights, and a town population where almost everyone shared the same last names. Jamie pulled the photo free, brushed off the dust, and stared. A girl stood in the center of the frame, long auburn hair, denim jacket, smile fading as if she hadn't expected the picture to be taken. She was frozen in a moment of half surprise. But that wasn't what made Jamie's throat tighten. It was the man standing in the far right corner of the frame, barely visible in the shadows, but unmistakably there. His posture stiff. His eyes locked on the girl. His face half hidden under the brim of a cap. Jamie knew enough about Briar Creek's history to recognize the girl immediately. Evelyn Marsh, the town's most haunting mystery. Missing since October 12, 1983. Case never solved. This photograph should have been part of the file, but it wasn't. Jamie swallowed, set the picture down on a manila folder, and rushed down the hallway. Detective Ray Dalton was on his second cup of coffee, holding it carefully because his hands weren't as steady as they used to be. At 57, Ray looked like the kind of man built from quiet persistence, graying hair. Thick mustache, shoulders that carried too much weight over the years. On his desk sat an ashtray he hadn't used since he quit smoking in '98. But he kept it there because it reminded him of his training officer. A man who always said, the smallest details solve the biggest problems. Ray still believed that. He was reading a report he didn't care for when Jamie burst in without knocking. A Detective Dalton. I think you should see this. Ray lifted his head slowly, the way older men do when sudden movement hurts. What's got your hair on fire? Jamie handed him the photograph. Ray adjusted his bifocals and stared. The moment he saw the girl's face, his jaw tightened. Evelyn Marsh, he murmured. He hadn't said that name out loud in years. Detective Marla Benton entered behind him, carrying a stack of papers. At 52, she was sharp, methodical, and one of the best interviewers the department ever had. She looked over Ray's shoulder. "Where'd that come from?" she asked. Jamie explained how he'd found it behind the radio, how it wasn't part of the official case file. Ray placed the photograph flat on his desk, not touching it more than he had to. He studied the edges, the lighting, the composition. He'd investigated the Marsh case back when he was barely 17 as a ride-along volunteer. He still remembered the candlelight vigils, the missing posters taped to telephone poles, the quiet dread that swept through Briar Creek. But he didn't remember this picture, "Marla," he said, tapping the corner where the shadowed man stood. "Do you see him?" She leaned in, squinting. "That corner. There's someone there." "Wasn't in the original file," Ray said. "Which means," Marla added slowly, "someone removed it." Ray exhaled a long, tired breath. He stared at the man's silhouette. Something about it felt wrong, off balance, intentional. Jamie cleared his throat nervously. "So, what do we do?" Ray looked up at him. "We reopen the Briar Creek files." Jamie's eyes widened. That case was practically folklore. Every retired officer had a different version of what happened. "Why now?" he asked. Ray lifted the photograph. "Because this picture never made it into evidence, and someone had a reason for that. Evidence doesn't disappear on its own." Marla nodded thoughtfully. "This isn't just an oversight. Someone hid this. And whoever hid it," Ray added, "didn't want us knowing this man existed." Within an hour, the detectives set up the old case, board tacking up yellowed newspaper clippings, faded maps of Briar Creek, missing person flyers, and now, the newly discovered photograph in the center. Ray stepped back, arms crossed. The image of Evelyn stared back at him, her youthful innocence trapped forever in 1983. Beside her, the silhouette of the unknown man seemed to grow more ominous the longer he looked at it. Marla clipped an old Polaroid from the era next to it, showing Miller's Drive-In, where Evelyn was last seen. Ray remembered that place well. Malls for $1, neon lights, teenagers blasting Springsteen from their Trans-Ams. He'd spent half his youth there. Marla broke the silence. Why hide a photo unless it pointed to someone the department didn't want to expose? Or couldn't, Ray said quietly. The unspoken truth hung heavy between them. Someone inside the department may have buried the evidence. Ray studied the man's silhouette again. "Small details," he murmured. "Always the small ones." Jamie waited near the door, unsure if he should stay. Ray gave him a nod. "You did the right thing," Ray said. "Most people overlook the details." Jamie smiled faintly. "Mom always said small things matter more than people think." Ray and Marla shared a look. Small things. Small lies. Small mistakes. They all had a way of growing into something dangerous. Ray tapped the photograph lightly. "Let's find out who this man was." And just like that, after 41 years, the Briar Creek files breathed again. Miller's Drive-In hadn't changed much since the early 1980s. Sure, the neon had dimmed, and the sign flickered worse now. But the bones of the place remained same concrete lot, same checkerboard menu board, same little speaker boxes that buzzed whenever a car pulled in. It was frozen in time, like a museum exhibit of small-town American youth. Detectives Ray Dalton and Marla Benton stood at the edge of the cracked parking lot, staring at the faded red paint on the old car stalls. The March wind was cold, sweeping up dried leaves and pushing them across the asphalt like tiny ghosts. "Miller's," Ray murmured. "Haven't been here since maybe '92. Marla smiled faintly. "I used to come here with my cousins. We'd split a chili dog and blast whatever was on the radio. It felt like the world stopped for a minute." "Yeah," Ray said softly. Places like this were magic once. He knew this was the last place Evelyn Marsh had ever been seen. The newspaper clippings said she was here the night she disappeared. October 12, 1983. A Wednesday. Cool weather. The leaves already turning. Back then, the drive-in was alive. Teenagers cruising in Mustangs, Camaros, and Chevys. Cassette tapes littering dashboards. The smell of melted cheese from nacho trays. Kids roller skating orders out to cars on Friday nights. A community hub. Now it felt like a tomb. Ray and Marla walked toward the counter, where the current owner, Frank Miller Jr., was wiping down a stainless steel surface with slow, practiced movements. He recognized them immediately. "You're not here for a burger, are you?" Frank asked, setting the rag down. Ray shook his head. "Old case. We need to ask you about that night in '83. Frank's expression changed nostalgia mixed with an old, unspoken ache. "Evelyn Marsh," he said quietly. "Haven't heard that name spoken in years. Anything you remember?" Marla asked. Frank leaned against the counter. "I remember she was here that night. Came around 8:30, ordered a vanilla shake. Sat in her dad's old Dodge Dart Blue one. Lousy transmission. You could hear it from across the lot." Ray nodded. This matched the witness statements. Frank squinted as if searching for something in his memory. She wasn't herself. Normally, she'd chat with the kids who worked here. But that night, she was quiet. Kept looking around. Looking around at who? Ray asked. Frank hesitated. "That's the thing. I don't know." He paused again, chewing on the inside of his cheek. But there was a guy, sitting alone in a beat-up pickup. Didn't order anything. Didn't talk to anyone. Just watched the cars. Ray and Marla exchanged a glance. "Can you describe him?" Marla asked. Frank scratched the back of his neck. "I can't picture his face anymore. But I remember the feeling he gave off, like he didn't belong, like he was studying everyone." Ray thought of the unfiled photograph. The man in the corner, watching. "Anyone else see Evelyn leave?" Ray asked. Frank nodded. "A few employees, but they all gave different stories. One said she left alone. Another said she left after someone tapped on her car window. One kid swore she got in someone else's car, which was true." Marla asked. Frank sighed. "That's the problem. They were kids. They were scared after she disappeared. People remember what makes them feel less guilty, not what actually happened." Ray absorbed that quietly. Truth warped by fear. Truth softened by shame. Truth rewritten to protect oneself. A theme that had haunted this case for 41 years. Frank pushed himself upright. "Look, if you want real answers, talk to the people who worked here. Some still live in town." He scribbled names on a napkin and slid it across the counter. Ray thanked him, then took one last look around the drive-in. The fading neon buzzed overhead. "You ever think," Marla said softly as they walked back toward the car, "that places like this held the whole town together? Back then, life felt simpler, slower." Ray nodded. "Yeah, and maybe that's why people still cling to their versions of that night. No one wants to tarnish their golden memories. But the past was never as perfect as people remembered. And beneath the glow of 1983 nostalgia lay something darker." First interview, the roller skate girl, her name was Linda Foster, now 57 and running a small craft shop downtown. She welcomed the detectives into her shop with a warm smile, the kind that had probably earned her plenty of tips back in the day. When Ray mentioned the case, Linda's smile wilted. "I always hoped that case would stay buried," she whispered. "Why?" Marla asked gently. Linda looked down at her hands. "Because I didn't tell the whole truth back then." Ray pulled out the photograph. "Do you recognize her from that night?" Linda nodded immediately. Evelyn was sitting alone, kept checking her rearview mirror. "I thought she was waiting for someone. Did anyone talk to her?" Marla asked. Linda swallowed hard. "Yes, a man. I didn't see his face, clearly just his silhouette near her car. I thought maybe it was her boyfriend or brother." Ray leaned forward. "Did she say anything afterward?" Linda closed her eyes. She said he knew something about her family, that he needed to talk privately. I didn't think much of it. People talked like that all the time back then." Ray felt a knot tighten in his chest. Someone who knew something personal about Evelyn. Someone who insisted on privacy. Did you tell officers this back then? Marla asked. Linda shook her head slowly, guilt clouding her face. No, I didn't want to get involved. I was afraid of being blamed if something happened. Ray studied her closely. And something did happen, he said quietly. Linda looked like the weight of 40 years had suddenly dropped onto her shoulders. I was young. I made the cowardly choice. Didn't want trouble? Ray couldn't judge her not fully. Youth makes foolish decisions. Fear silences truth. It always has. But the detail mattered. A man approached Evelyn that night. A man with something to tell her. A man who fit the shape of the figure in the photo. Tommy Brayton, now 56, had been a lanky 15-year-old working nights for pocket money. He lived in a faded duplex near the river, surrounded by old beer signs and shelves of vinyl records. He remembered the night clearly. I saw Evelyn leave, Tommy said, but not alone. Ray's pen froze mid-note. Who was with her? Tommy bit his lip. I don't know his name, but he had one of those Brown County maintenance jackets. They used to do repairs around town. Ray and Marla froze. That jacket matched the silhouette from the photograph, matched the man no one ever identified. What happened after she left? Marla asked. Tommy lowered his voice. The truck followed her. Same one that had been parked all night watching everyone. I didn't think much of it back then. Guys followed girls all the time. It was stupid, reckless, normal teenage behavior. Ray leaned in. But this wasn't normal, was it? Tommy shook his head. No, that guy wasn't a kid. He was older, watching, waiting back in their car. Ray placed the photograph on the dashboard. To witnesses. Same kind of man, Marla said. And the truck, Ray added, matches the description from the old reports. Someone said they saw a brown truck speeding away from town around 10 p.m. A windmill in Ray's memory turned, slowly but deliberately. And yet, Marla said, none of this is in the official case file. Ray clenched his jaw. It should have been, which means someone scrubbed it. The sun dipped low behind the tree line, casting long shadows across Miller's Drive-In. The neon letters flickered one last time before surrendering to darkness. Ray stared at the photograph, again the man half-hidden, watching Evelyn. Whoever he was, Ray said softly, he wasn't done that night. Briar Creek looked peaceful from the outside, rows of maple trees lining the sidewalks. Tidy porches, wind chimes clinking in the breeze, and a quiet hum of everyday life. But beneath that well-kept small-town surface lived memories people pretended they'd forgotten, or wished they had. Detectives Ray Dalton and Marla Benton drove slowly down Evelyn Marsh's old street, a narrow row of 1960s ranch homes, each one a near clone of the next. A few houses still had those aluminum lawn chairs. Older viewers would instantly recognize the kind that left woven patterns on the back of your legs. Someone was grilling in the distance, and the smell of charcoal drifted through the air. For a moment, the scene felt warm, almost nostalgic. But the weight of the case stiffened the air. Ray parked in front of the Marsh home, a pale yellow house with white trim, shutters faded from years of Ohio sun. A solitary rocking chair sat on the porch, gently tapping the wall each time the wind nudged it. Evelyn's father had passed years ago. Her mother had moved to Indiana to live with a niece. The house was vacant but maintained by the town for occasional property checks. Ray stood on the walkway, imagining the girl who once lived here. A teenager walking out the front door with her backpack in '82, heading to school. A girl playing with sparklers in the yard on the 4th of July. A girl whose face once filled the local papers in desperate pleas for information. Marla looked at the porch thoughtfully. Places hold echoes, she said, especially ones tied to unresolved endings. Ray nodded. People too. Together, they walked around the house, observing the yard. The grass was slightly overgrown, but otherwise tidy. A rusted swing set stood in the back, a relic from decades ago. The kind every kid had used until the chains squeaked and the rubber seats cracked. Ray could almost hear the laughter of neighborhood children from long ago. There was nothing physically useful here, but the place held emotional truth. Evelyn had been part of this neighborhood. People here had seen her grow up. People here had seen the signs, if there were any. But had anyone spoken up? Ray doubted it. Briar Creek High School still had the same brick exterior from the yearbook photos of the 70s and 80s. A hand-painted mural of the school mascot, the Briar Creek Bears, covered one entire wall, faded from years of student pranks and touch-ups. Inside the school office, the secretary greeted them with a tired smile. "You're here about Evelyn Marsh, aren't you?" she asked, lowering her voice like someone mentioning a ghost. Ray showed his badge. "We're reviewing the case, trying to piece together her last days." The woman sighed. "I was a junior when she disappeared. Half the school went silent for weeks." She pulled open a drawer and retrieved an old yearbook, 1983. Ray flipped to Evelyn's portrait. She had kind eyes, soft smile, a hopeful expression. She was quiet, the secretary said. Smart. Carried more weight on her shoulders than most kids her age. Her family was going through things back then. "What kind of things?" Marla asked. The woman paused, glancing at the hallway like she might get in trouble just for remembering. "There were arguments," she said carefully. Her father worked at the shoe factory before it closed. Hard times fell on that family. Money troubles, pride troubles. You know how men were back then. Ray did know. He'd grown up in the 60s and 70s. Men didn't talk about their problems, they swallowed them. Evelyn tried to keep the peace, the secretary added. But sometimes she came to school looking like she hadn't slept. Marla jotted notes. Did anyone ever report concerns? Teachers, counselors? The secretary sighed. Back then, no. You didn't meddle in family matters unless someone was bleeding. Ray looked up sharply. This mattered. Sometimes silence is a weapon all its own. He closed the yearbook gently. Did she mention anyone bothering her? Anyone she feared? The secretary hesitated. There was someone. A man. Older. Not a student. She told a teacher once that someone kept showing up near her street. Watching her? But when the teacher asked for a description, Evelyn shut down. Told her to forget she said anything. Ray exchanged a look with Marla. A man watching her. A man she was afraid of. A man she refused to name. And now, a man caught in the unfiled photograph. The threads were tightening. Her name was Ruth Callahan, 82 years old and sharp as a winter wind. She lived across the street from the Marsh home and had for over 50 years. The detectives knocked, and Ruth answered slowly, leaning on an old wooden cane. Come in, she said. "I know why you're here." Her living room was a time capsule, doilies on every surface, framed embroidery on the walls, a bulky Zenith console TV in the corner, and the faint smell of rose lotion. Ruth sat on her floral recliner. I never thought I'd see anyone look into that case again. Ray sat across from her. "We're reopening it, ma'am. We need your help." Ruth clasped her hands together. "I've carried something for 40 years. Something I didn't tell police back then." Ray leaned forward. "What is it?" Ruth inhaled shakily. "I heard a scream that night." Ray's heart thudded. "From where?" Marla asked. "From the woods behind the Marsh house." Just one scream. Sharp, then silence. I looked out the window and saw a figure running. A figure, tall, wearing something dark. Maybe a jacket, hard to see, but he was moving fast. Toward the service road. Ray felt a chill crawl up his spine. "Why didn't you report it?" Marla asked gently. Ruth lowered her eyes. "I was afraid. The town was already on edge. Back then, women were expected to stay quiet about things they weren't sure of, and I wasn't sure. When you get old, detective, doubt is the thing that eats you the most." Ray nodded slowly. The cost of silence, the burden of fear, the guilt that grows heavier with age. Ruth wiped her eyes. "I'm sorry I didn't say anything. You're saying it now," Ray said softly. "That matters." When the detectives stepped back outside, dusk had settled over Briar Creek. The street lamps flickered on with a familiar hum, the same hum Ray remembered hearing as a kid in the 70s. Marla looked toward the woods. A scream, a man running. Witnesses from the drive-in, and a hidden photo. It's all pointing in one direction. Ray nodded. "But we still don't know the identity of the man," he said. Marla studied the marshland behind the houses. Maybe someone at the county maintenance yard knew him. Ray's jaw tightened. "And if they did," he said, "someone kept that secret for a long time." They climbed into the car. As Ray pulled away from the curb, he glanced at Evelyn's old house in the rearview mirror. A quiet street, a quiet life, a quiet disappearance. But quiet doesn't mean clean. Quiet often means covered. And Briar Creek had been covering something for 41 years. The photograph haunted Ray Dalton in ways he didn't like admitting. The shadowed figure in the corner, so subtle yet deliberate, had a presence that refused to be ignored. Something about the posture, the way the man's shoulders hunched slightly forward, suggested careful observation, patience, and cold intent. Marla Benton flipped the photo over, checking for any markings. Nothing, no notes, no annotations, no fingerprints. Just the image itself, silent and accusing. "This man," she said softly, "he wasn't supposed to be there. Whoever he was, someone went to great lengths to hide him." Ray nodded. "And now it's up to us to unearth him." The first clue came from the county maintenance yard records, tucked into a dusty filing cabinet in the clerk's office. The county had employed dozens of temporary workers during the summer of 1983, many of them on off-the-books arrangements. It was common for small towns like Briar Creek. Most names led to retirees, relocations, or faded death certificates. But one caught their attention. A man named Caleb Trask. Caleb's file was sparse. No phone number, no permanent address. Only a note from the supervisor: left town suddenly. Never returned. Ray frowned. Suddenly is an understatement. He vanished completely. No forwarding address, no next of kin. It's like he disappeared off the face of the earth. Marla tapped the photograph. Compare the jacket. County-issued maintenance. Same style, same buttons. "That's him." Ray swallowed. "We've been staring at him all along." The detectives started visiting retired county workers. One by one, men in their 70s recalled vaguely about a man who came and went, kept to himself, and sometimes brought a camera. A camera that sounded familiar. "He liked taking pictures," said Harold Jenkins, a former road crew foreman. "Not official photos. People, trees, cars, even kids." I remember telling him, "Don't take pictures of kids, Caleb." Didn't listen. Creepy guy. Quiet, too quiet. Always observing. Ray scribbled notes. Quiet observation. Photography, sudden disappearance. The pieces began to click. "It fits," he muttered. Someone who can move unnoticed. Someone who knows the town like a shadow. Marla added he could have watched Evelyn for weeks. Taken notes. Planned something without anyone knowing. The weight of 41 years of inaction pressed on them. The unfiled photograph wasn't just a clue, was proof of systemic oversight. Or worse, deliberate concealment. Back at the police department, the detectives scrutinized the photograph under a magnifying glass. Caleb's features were partially obscured by the cap, but the shape of his nose, the line of his jaw, and the slight slouch of his shoulders matched descriptions from Harold Jenkins. Ray tapped the photo. We're looking at him. 41 years later, we finally know who was watching her, who had the opportunity. Marla nodded. And yet, we're still missing the motive. Ray frowned. Not missing. Overlooked. Sometimes motives are simpler than we think: money, power, fear, or control. And sometimes, it's all of them at once. The detective leaned back in his chair, eyes fixed on the photo. The room smelled faintly of old coffee and dust, the same aroma it had held for decades. He imagined Caleb moving silently across town, a ghost in the night, unseen but always present. While reviewing other evidence from the unfiled boxes, they discovered a fragment of Evelyn's diary torn from the original journal. The pages were yellowed, the ink faded, but the words remained legible. October 11th, 1983. He watches me. I don't know why he's here. I can't tell anyone. They won't believe me. Marla read it aloud, her voice shaking slightly. She knew. She feared him. And she didn't trust anyone enough to speak. Ray swallowed hard. Fear like that. It's primal. She understood danger in a way adults didn't see. And we ignored it. It was the first clear link between Evelyn and Caleb Trask. Not a fleeting presence. Not a coincidence. But focused, predatory observation. Investigating Caleb's background, the detectives uncovered a series of Kodak film canisters stored in an abandoned shed near the outskirts of town. Likely left there since 1983, each reel contained snapshots: streets of Briar Creek, empty playgrounds, derelict cars, and occasionally blurred images of townsfolk. One reel stopped them cold. It showed Evelyn at Miller's Drive-In, smiling, holding a milkshake, completely unaware of the camera. In the corner of the frame, Caleb's shadow loomed barely visible, but unmistakable. Marla muttered, "He captured her life without permission." Every moment. A shadow photographer. Ray's jaw tightened. And nobody did anything. 41 years of silence. The pattern was now undeniable. Caleb Trask had stalked Evelyn, documented her, and someone in town either ignored it or concealed it. Nostalgia seeped in. Ray remembered his own adolescence. When photography was magical, Polaroids, disposable cameras, film development in small-town darkrooms. Pictures were innocent memories. But here, a camera had become a tool of menace. The detectives cross-referenced Caleb's last known locations with witness statements. One recurring mention: a brown truck. Witnesses recalled seeing it near Miller's Drive-In, near the shoe factory, and along the back roads adjacent to the Marsh property. Ray clenched his fist. All roads lead back to him. He had access, opportunity, and the tools to manipulate the town's memory. We're dealing with someone who blended into the ordinary while committing extraordinary crimes, Marla added, and his disappearance after Evelyn went missing. Too convenient. He wasn't just avoiding arrest. He was escaping scrutiny entirely. The moral thread was sharpening in Ray's mind. Predators often hide in plain sight. And blind trust, whether in neighbors, coworkers, or community norms, has a cost. Ray paused, gazing at the photograph one last time before filing it in a temporary evidence envelope. He thought about Briar Creek in the early 80s. The hum of transistor radios. The smell of fresh-popped popcorn at the local theater. High school dances where kids clumsily twirled in rented suits and floral dresses. Drive-ins with neon lights flickering in the night. Innocence everywhere. Yet danger quietly nested in a shadowed corner. The world seems simpler then, Ray muttered. But danger doesn't care about nostalgia. Marla nodded. We're living proof. And Evelyn. She paid the price for the town's blind spots. Ray placed the photograph carefully in a folder labeled Trask, Investigation 2024. We follow him, he said firmly. every clue, every shadow, until we know everything he did. Until we can finally give Evelyn her story back. Marla glanced at him. And maybe, finally, we learn what it means to trust wisely. Ray exhaled. 41 years later, the case had a new pulse. And for the first time, justice didn't feel like it would be too late. The Briar Creek evidence room smelled of aged paper, dust, and that faint, lingering odor of coffee, long cold. Ray Dalton and Marla Benton had spent weeks sifting through old files, photographs, and forgotten case notes, but nothing had prepared them for what they found next, behind a set of filing cabinets that hadn't been moved in decades. Tucked into the narrow space, they discovered a second evidence box. Its cardboard was water-stained, edges frayed, and it had clearly been ignored for years. Ray carefully lifted it onto the table. The box had no markings except a faded label. Miscellaneous -1983. Who leaves a box like this untouched? Marla asked, eyebrows furrowed. Ray didn't answer immediately. Instead, he slid the lid open and peered inside. Inside, they found several items that sent a chill down their spines. A broken gold locket, missing one half of a tiny photo. A diner receipt, dated October 12, 1983, Miller's Drive-In. A torn diary page with Evelyn's handwriting, her words partially smudged by time. Another unfiled photograph, this one showing Evelyn looking directly at the camera, her expression frozen in fear. Marla's breath caught. This was hidden. Ray picked up the photograph with gloved hands, studying every detail. The background matched Miller's Drive-In, the lot empty except for one car parked near the neon-lit counter. The fear in Evelyn's eyes wasn't subtle. Something or someone had startled her, and the lens had captured the moment perfectly. Nostalgia intertwined with terror. The photograph evoked the early 80s perfectly, the orange glow of streetlights, the shine of a freshly waxed car, the glow of neon against the dark sky, even the faint hum of a jukebox somewhere in the distance. But the image also whispered danger, something no nostalgic memory could sweeten. Why would someone hide this? Marla whispered, her voice barely audible. Ray set the photograph down and examined the locket. He opened it carefully, revealing a faded portrait of a young woman, almost certainly Evelyn, though the photo had been cracked. Someone wanted to erase her existence, he said, quietly, or at least make sure no one saw the truth. Marla nodded. And yet, they didn't destroy everything. They left enough to haunt whoever opened it decades later. The diner receipt confirmed the timeline. Evelyn had been at Miller's Drive-In at 8:45 p.m., the exact window witnesses had reported her last seen. The torn diary page added another layer. I saw him again today, watching. I can't tell anyone, they won't believe me. I'm scared. Her words were a testament to the fear that had governed her last hours. Ray's mind went back to the unfiled photograph in the first box. He realized something chilling. Someone inside the department had hidden evidence. Not by accident, not out of negligence, but deliberately. Marla, he said, this isn't just a cold case oversight. This is someone protecting themselves, or someone else. Someone in authority decided this photo shouldn't exist. Marla's eyes darkened. And 41 years later, we find it by chance. The consequences, we can't even imagine. The detectives were silent for a moment, letting the weight of that realization sink in. In small towns like Briar Creek, secrets had a way of intertwining with daily life. And people who promised to uphold the law sometimes became part of the cover-up. The torn diary page and the photograph led Ray and Marla to revisit Miller's Drive yet again. They compared the locket, receipt, and diary with witness statements collected weeks earlier. One pattern was emerging. Evelyn's fear was centered not on strangers, but on someone she recognized, someone she saw too often, someone who had access. Ray examined the diner receipt carefully. The handwriting was messy, likely Evelyn's, but a faint set of pencil. Marks on the corner suggested someone had annotated it for reasons unknown. Marla leaned in. "Look at these scratches," she said. "Could be a note or a warning." Ray nodded. Or a reminder to themselves. Whoever hid this wanted to remember without letting anyone else know. The evidence painted a picture of deliberate concealment, a careful suppression of truth. The thought made Ray's stomach churn. 41 years of lies, excuses, and fear had allowed Evelyn's story to be buried. Even amidst the tension, nostalgia crept in naturally. Ray remembered visiting Miller's as a teen, the smell of French fries, malted shakes, the crackling of AM radios in the corner of the parking lot. Teenagers leaning against car doors, laughing, unaware that one of them might never return home. The scent of vinyl records and leather jackets from passing cars. These memories contrasted sharply with the evidence in front of them, innocence shattered, frozen in time. Marla, too, felt the pull. She recalled her first drive-in experience. The excitement of sliding a burger tray through the car window, trying to act older than her 13 years. That joy, she realized, was exactly what Evelyn had been robbed of. The juxtaposition was bitter but vital. The same world that nurtured youthful innocence had also concealed malice in its shadows. Ray placed the photograph, locket, receipt, and diary fragment back into the evidence envelope. He realized that small choices, the decision to ignore a detail, to dismiss a teenager's fear, to hide a photo, had consequences far beyond their original context. Every hidden item, every unspoken word, was a thread in a web that had trapped Evelyn. 41 years later, uncovering them felt like navigating a maze of human frailty, cowardice, misplaced trust, and the quiet cruelty of ignoring warning signs. Marla broke the silence. "It's tragic," she said. "Not just what happened to Evelyn, but what people chose not to do. How easily they let fear and convenience outweigh courage." Ray didn't respond immediately. Instead, he stared at the items, imagining Evelyn's life. Frozen at that moment in 1983. The moral was clear. The smallest decision, keeping quiet. Hiding a fact, avoiding responsibility, can have devastating consequences. And it had. Ray turned to Marla, determination hardening his features. "This box," he said, "is more than a collection of forgotten items. It's a map. A roadmap to the truth. And if we follow it carefully, we'll understand exactly what happened. Who hid it, and why?" Marla nodded. "And who's responsible? Even if the people involved are long gone or afraid to speak." The detectives knew the investigation was only beginning. But with every hidden item uncovered, every piece of evidence pieced together, Briar Creek's dark past was inching closer to daylight. One thing was certain: Evelyn's story would no longer be buried, and the consequences of decades-long silence were about to be revealed. Briar Creek had a way of swallowing memories. People moved on. Streets changed names. Businesses closed and reopened under different owners. But for some, memories refused to be buried. They lingered like shadows behind closed curtains. Ray Dalton and Marla Benton began searching for the witnesses from 1983. Those who had been near Evelyn Marsh the night she disappeared. Some were gone. Some refused to talk. A few, however, remembered everything. The first was Derek N., who had worked as a car hope at Miller's Drive and alongside Evelyn. Now in his mid-50s, Derek had traded uniforms for a hardware store apron and a set of calloused hands. "I never forgot her," Derek said quietly. "She was always careful, polite. But that night, she seemed uneasy. I thought maybe she had a fight at home." Didn't realize how serious it was. Ray leaned forward. "Did you see anyone with her? Or anyone watching?" Derek hesitated, then shook his head. I didn't look too hard. You know, teenagers, lots of noise. The music from the jukebox. But now I think I probably should have. Marla exchanged a glance with Ray, another person who had the power to help but had stayed silent. Next, they tracked Samuel Green, a retired postal worker. He remembered delivering mail near Evelyn Street that October evening. I saw her, he said, voice trembling. She walked past me, carrying a small bag. But there was a man-long coat, hat pulled low. I couldn't see his face. But I felt wrong. Something bad was coming. I didn't call it in. I thought I'd be overreacting. Ray tapped his pen against his notepad. Did you recognize him later? Samuel shook his head. No, but I remember his posture. He wasn't normal, quiet, watching, intent. The detectives realized a pattern. Everyone saw pieces of the puzzle, but no one spoke up. Fear, doubt, and social inertia had combined to protect a predator. 41 years later, that silence had consequences. Ray and Marla returned to the only lead with substance, Caleb Trask. They contacted law enforcement in the counties surrounding Briar Creek and discovered that Caleb had left the state. Soon after October 1983, there were rumors of him working odd jobs in neighboring towns, living in motels and leaving almost no trace. He was like a ghost, Marla said, disappearing as soon as anyone looked closely. Ray held up the photograph again. Ghosts aren't harmless, especially when they prey on the living. In a stroke of luck, one of the retired deputies handed them a box of old Polaroids he had kept in his attic. Most were innocuous accidents at the fair, town parades, but one stopped both detectives cold. It was a Polaroid of Evelyn at Miller's Drive and alone, smiling faintly, and in the background, a shadowy figure lurking by the neon sign. The figure was unmistakably Caleb Trask. Marla examined it with a magnifying glass. It's subtle, but deliberate. He wanted to remain unseen, but left traces. These images, they're a timeline of his obsession. Ray felt a shiver. Obsession. Pretense of normalcy. Years of hidden surveillance. And every witness who didn't speak had contributed unknowingly to Evelyn's vulnerability. Despite the tension, the detectives couldn't help noticing the echoes of the past. The Polaroid's edges were curled from decades of storage. The smell of old photographs, a mix of chemicals and dust, triggered a memory for Ray. Developing photos in a high school darkroom, watching images emerge slowly in red light. The smell, the anticipation, the patience required it was a ritual of care. Here, the ritual had been corrupted. Photography, meant to preserve innocence, had instead been a weapon. Marla commented softly, I remember my first camera. We'd spend hours capturing sunsets and friends. Back then, it was about joy, memory, not fear. Ray nodded. And yet, the same tools can be turned against us if we're not vigilant. The detectives reflected on a bitter truth. Small mistakes and silence had compounded into tragedy. Fear and inaction had allowed Caleb to move freely. Obsession had turned harmless tools into instruments of control. Witnesses had lived with guilt for decades. It's not just about what he did, Marla said. It's about what we all failed to do then, and even now, if we allow oversight to persist. Ray felt the weight of 41 years. The lesson, he said quietly, is that silence and inaction are dangerous. Neglect can create the space for cruelty to flourish, and the consequences don't vanish with time, they fester. With the witnesses interviewed and the Polaroids collected, Ray and Marla realized the investigation was finally beginning to form a full picture. Caleb Trask had been meticulous, careful, and deliberate. Every overlooked witness, every ignored clue, and every hidden photograph contributed to a chain that had trapped Evelyn and haunted the town for decades. Asterisk. Caleb Trask had underestimated the persistence of truth, the inevitability of exposure, and the cost of obsession left unchecked. As the confrontation unfolded, the detectives couldn't help but notice the setting itself. The drive-in, once a beacon of 1980s youth culture, was frozen in time. Checkerboard floors, retro signage, and the faint hum of a forgotten jukebox. Ray thought of his own adolescence, the thrill of late-night movies. Teenagers sharing milkshakes, the smell of vinyl records and popcorn. That nostalgia collided with the present horror. A predator had taken advantage of the same innocence that had once defined this place. Marla, observing Caleb's hesitation, whispered, "The innocence of the past doesn't protect us, but remembering it helps us recognize what was stolen." Ray nodded. The lesson was clear. Life's smallest choices, silence, inaction, and misplaced trust could resonate across decades, leaving scars that nostalgia alone could never heal. Caleb's defenses crumbled when Ray held up Evelyn's diary fragment. The fear in her handwriting, the details of being watched, and the fragmented notes from the community's forgotten witnesses were undeniable. "I didn't mean to hurt her," Caleb said finally, voice wavering. "I only wanted control, observation, to feel like I mattered." Ray's jaw tightened. "You mattered, yes, but you did it at her expense. You destroyed a life. And 41 years of silence won't undo that." Marla added, "It's not just about you. It's about the town, the witnesses, and the lessons we ignore when we choose convenience over courage. People didn't act, and you exploited that. But it ends now." Caleb lowered his head, realizing that the web he had spun so carefully for decades was finally unraveling. As police backup arrived, Caleb Trask was taken into custody without resistance. The detectives watched as the man who had haunted Briar Creek for 41 years was finally held accountable. Ray exhaled, the weight of decades lifting slightly. "It's never too late for truth," he said. "Even after 41 years, justice can be pursued." Marla added, "And for the town, the lesson is clear. Silence protects no one. Every choice, every decision carries consequences even if it takes decades to see them." Before leaving, Ray walked to the old neon sign, brushing a finger across the chipped letters. The drive-in still smelled faintly of popcorn and grease, the distant hum of a forgotten jukebox echoing in the corner. This place, he murmured, held laughter, innocence, and shadows. But now, the past is being acknowledged. The story remembered. That's what matters. Marla looked at him. History doesn't forget when someone listens, and people can learn from the past if they pay attention. Ray nodded. 41 years of fear, silence, and obsession had finally been exposed. The moral had been lived, painfully and fully. Small choices, hidden fears, and delayed action can have lifelong consequences, but the truth, once pursued, can restore balance, even decades later. Briar Creek would never forget Evelyn Marsh again. The Briar Creek courthouse smelled of polished wood and musty papers. For the first time in decades, the trial of Caleb Trask drew the town's attention. The courtroom was nearly full, faces lined with age, etched with decades of memory. Some had lived through Evelyn's disappearance. Others were younger, but fascinated by the shadow of a mystery that had lingered over their town for 41 years. Ray Dalton and Marla Benton sat at the prosecutor's table. The unfiled photographs and diary fragments laid neatly before them. Every piece of evidence, every witness statement, and every Polaroid would now be scrutinized in a courtroom, the place where silence, neglect, and fear would finally meet accountability. The prosecutor's voice carried across the room, calm but firm. "Ladies and gentlemen, 41 years ago, Evelyn Marsh vanished. The investigation was incomplete, evidence was hidden, and fear silenced witnesses. But today, the truth emerges. The defendant, Caleb Trask, manipulated, stalked, and ultimately endangered her life. His actions, hidden by decades of inaction, will now be held to account. Ray watched Caleb's face. The older man's jaw had tightened. The smirk he once carried was gone, replaced by tension and uncertainty. For 41 years, he had assumed invisibility. Now, he could no longer hide behind shadows, obscurity, or the town's silence. One by one, the witnesses recounted their memories. Derek N. described seeing Evelyn at Miller's Drive-In, her nervous glances toward a shadowy figure by the neon sign. Samuel Green spoke of the long coat, the hat pulled low, and the unnerving presence that lingered in his peripheral vision. Each testimony, though fragmented and aged by time, painted a complete picture when combined with the recovered photographs and diary entries. The jury leaned forward, captivated by the narrative, a mixture of fear, obsession, and the town's collective failure to act. Marla whispered to Ray, "Even after 41 years, these memories matter. Every small detail is a thread in the truth." Ray nodded. "And every thread reveals consequences, not just for Caleb, but for everyone who remained silent." The photographs, particularly the unfiled ones, drew murmurs from the courtroom. The magnified Polaroids showed Evelyn's fear, the careful positioning of Caleb in the background, and the pattern of his obsession. The gold locket, cracked and yellowed, testified to intimacy gone wrong, possession of someone's life without permission. A tangible representation of control and intrusion. Ray presented the torn diary pages. These pages show a young woman's fear. A fear dismissed, ignored, and compounded by a community unwilling to act. The responsibility for that fear lies not only with Caleb Trask, but with every choice to look away. The moral of the case became undeniable to everyone in the room: inaction. Misplaced trust and silence carry consequences that can span decades. Even amid the tension, nostalgia punctuated the story. The jury listened as Ray described Miller's Drive-In in 1983. The checkerboard tables, the hum of a jukebox, teenagers laughing under neon lights, the smell of popcorn and fries in the cool night air. He recalled his own youth, the thrill of cruising with friends, the excitement of first dates, and the simplicity of small-town life. That innocence, he explained, had been exploited by someone who understood the hidden dangers lurking behind familiar sights. Marla added, "It's a reminder that our past isn't just nostalgia. It's context. It's where lessons begin and mistakes linger." The courtroom seemed to lean in, captivated by the contrast between youthful joy and decades-long injustice. When Caleb took the stand, he tried to defend himself with calm rationalizations. "I didn't hurt her," I observed. "I recorded. I preserved history," he said, voice measured. "I never intended to cause harm." Ray countered softly, yet firmly, observation without consent, fear induced in another human being. And decades of hiding your actions, these are harm. Caleb, fear is real. Obsession is real. And the consequences of your choices are undeniable," Marla added. "The town's silence may have protected you for 41 years. But truth cannot be buried forever." Caleb's defenses faltered as the jury examined the photographs, diary pages, and witness accounts. The tangible evidence and decades of negligence converged to make an unassailable case. The jury returned after a tense half-hour. The foreman's voice resonated in the courtroom. "We find the defendant, Caleb Trask, guilty on all counts." Gasps echoed in the room. Some faces softened, tears glinting in the eyes of those who remembered Evelyn, who had lived with fear or guilt for decades. For others, it was a revelation, a lesson in vigilance, responsibility, and the costs of silence. Ray felt a weight lift. 41 years of fear, obsession, and hidden evidence had finally led to accountability. The moral lesson was clear and unavoidable. Choices, small or large, have consequences, and silence can be a quiet accomplice to wrongdoing. After the trial, Ray and Marla visited Evelyn's old neighborhood. They walked along the street she had known, imagining her life before the fear took hold. Children played in the fading autumn sunlight, chasing one another around the same drive-in lot where Caleb had once lurked. Ray observed, "Innocence returns when we protect it." Awareness, vigilance, and courage can prevent history from repeating itself, Marla added. And sometimes, acknowledging mistakes our own or our communities allows redemption to flourish, even after decades of error. The moral resonance was powerful. Truth, accountability, and action restore balance, even when delayed. And stories left untold for years still demand resolution. As they left Briar Creek, Ray glanced back at the drive-in. The neon sign flickered, just as it had decades ago. The hum of the old jukebox seemed to echo faintly in memory, carrying with it laughter, innocence, and small-town joys. "This place," Ray said, "reminds us that the past shapes the present. Choices we make, even the ones we think are insignificant, resonate across years, across lives." Marla nodded. "And the story we uncover is never just about crime. It's about people, trust, courage, and accountability." 41 years of silence ended here, but the lesson lives on. Ray and Marla walked away, carrying the weight of truth and the quiet satisfaction that Evelyn's story, long hidden, had finally been heard. The moral lingered naturally. Neglect, inaction, and misplaced trust have lasting consequences, but courage, accountability, and the pursuit of truth can restore balance. Even decades later, Briar Creek would remember. The courtroom emptied slowly, leaving behind the faint echo of Gavel's footsteps and whispered conversations. Briar Creek, a town accustomed to quiet routines, now carried a new weight: the resolution of a case that had lingered for 41 years. Evelyn Marsh's story had been obscured for decades, but truth had finally prevailed. Ray Dalton and Marla Benton walked outside, the chill of late November brushing against their faces. The leaves were brown, brittle, and scattered across the sidewalks, mirroring the scattered fragments of a life once lost. The town smelled faintly of smoke from home fireplaces and the caramel sweetness of a nearby bakery, nostalgia interwoven with the present. Ray exhaled, watching people leave the courthouse. "Justice may be slow, but it still matters," he said quietly. "Even after 41 years, accountability can be achieved." Marla nodded, her eyes lingering on the courthouse steps. "It's more than justice for Evelyn. It's a reminder to the town no action is ever too small. Every choice has consequences." Briar Creek's residents began to reflect on their own choices and inaction. Some had remained silent, afraid to interfere in 1983, but now faced the truth that their quiet compliance had contributed to Evelyn's fear and the predator's unchecked obsession. At Miller's Drive-In, now partially renovated but still retaining its retro charm, longtime locals gathered to discuss the trial. They recalled teenage nights spent under neon lights, the music from the jukebox, and the smell of French fries mingling with autumn air. Nostalgia and remorse mingled. The town realized that innocence, once taken for granted, could be fragile and easily exploited. One retired teacher sighed, "We let fear and politeness dictate our choices back then. I see now that silence wasn't neutral, it had consequences." Ray and Marla observed quietly. The acknowledgement of past mistakes, however delayed, was part of the healing process. Caleb was now in custody, facing a prison sentence that would ensure he could no longer prey on anyone. He had finally confronted accountability for the choices he made: obsession, surveillance, and deliberate intimidation of a vulnerable young woman. Yet his downfall also revealed the human tendency to underestimate the long-term impact of inaction and misplaced trust. Even though 41 years had passed, the evidence he had left behind, Polaroids, Diary fragments and unfiled photographs had ensured that justice was possible. Marla mused. He thought decades would bury him. But truth has a way of resurfacing, no matter how deep it's hidden. Ray nodded. And the lesson isn't just about him, it's about everyone who ignored signs, stayed silent, or made excuses. Choices echo, even if the consequences take decades to appear. Before leaving town, Ray and Marla revisited Evelyn's neighborhood. The street was quiet, a faint scent of pine and damp leaves filling the air. Children played near the park where Evelyn had once walked alone, laughter echoing across the empty swings. Ray paused at a mailbox, noting the date scratched into the metal decades earlier. This street, he said softly, held so much fear once. But now, it holds memory, reflection, and perhaps a little peace. Marla added, nostalgia isn't just about the past, it's about remembering what was lost, and how we can do better moving forward. They walked past the drive-in one last time. The neon sign buzzed faintly, the glow still soft against the night sky. Inside, the faint scent of popcorn reminded them of simpler times, of innocence, and the small joys that had once been overshadowed by fear. As they drove out of Briar Creek, Ray reflected on the entire investigation. The story of Evelyn Marsh, Caleb Trask, and the silent witnesses revealed more than crime. It revealed human behavior, community dynamics, and the consequences of everyday choices. Silence and inaction allowed fear and cruelty to flourish. Small decisions to ignore warning signs, to look away, to dismiss concerns can ripple across decades. Obsession and control can fester when unchecked by accountability or courage. Truth and persistence have the power to restore balance even after decades. Ray said aloud, the moral is clear. The consequences of our choices, big and small, are unavoidable. Silence doesn't protect. It enables. Courage, accountability, and action, however delayed, can restore what was lost. Marla smiled faintly. And that's a lesson for every one of us. Life is fragile. Trust is precious. And history, even hidden, will eventually demand attention. The detectives looked out over the town, now bathed in the soft glow of streetlights. Briar Creek had faced its shadow, acknowledged its mistakes, and finally reclaimed a lost story. Evelyn Marsh's life, her fear, and her courage to leave traces of truth had shaped the town's moral reckoning. Ray's voice was soft but resolute. History has shown us that consequences follow every choice. What we ignore, what we hide, what we leave unspoken, these all matter. But it's never too late to face the truth, to take responsibility, and to act, Marla added. And remembering the past, the people we've lost, and the moments we overlooked ensures that we do better in the future. As they drove out of town, the final moral resonated. Decisions, silence, and misplaced trust shape lives far beyond our immediate sight. Courage, accountability, and the pursuit of truth can heal wounds even after decades, and honor those who were lost. Briar Creek would never forget Evelyn Marsh again, and neither would anyone who understood the weight of small choices, the cost of silence, and the enduring power of truth.